Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with the final special selection for the week. That's where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you have a song you'd like for me to check out for special selection, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's comes at us from John. Says Satyricon, Mother North, live at the opera. No further information needed. I'm already stoked. I don't know what Live at the Opera is going to constitute instrumentally, but we have a choir here, and I'm excited about that. So, let's get into this. We got some Satyricon, see what they're doing.
Okay, sing it up!
Pretty typical, weighty, very grounded opening. Alright, so he shifted to a very fast 6/8. Interesting too, we only do 6/8. Okay, occasionally we'll do a bar of 5, but I can't seem to find the pattern of it. Ooh, that cymbal work. Show me the drummer. Yeah, okay. Okay. lot of very subtle tempo changes. Very interesting counterpoint there. Well, I mean, not. We'll touch on it later. We'll touch on it later. Yeah, that's pretty slick. There's a slight fermata there before coming into this next section. I think I've just noticed how short and sparse the vocal sections are.
Fantastisk motiverende å spille foran dere, ass. Fra hjertet, tusen takk.
I think that's it.
Operakoret! Kormester David Marval! Arrangør Kjetil Bjerkestrand. Takk skal du ha.
Just the visual divide there at the end kind of gave me a chuckle. Yeah, fittingly, I think this works well for Black Metal Week. I'd even say it kind of works well for Hi-Fi Black Metal Week, just focusing specifically on clarity of instrumentation. Just kind of a happy accident that it it landed on this week. I was a bit worried about the halfway point, maybe 3 minutes in, when I realized that we had just explored the same element for this entire beginning section. The guitar melody has pretty much been that single concept. The choir was providing a chordal idea based on the single note runs that the guitars were doing, but their movement and their phrasing was identical to what the guitars were doing. So I was like, okay, I get it. This is probably going to be the whole song. Black metal sticking with a single riff is not unusual. I felt like that's all it was going to be. And they really surprised me in the last half, mixing it up and turning it into a bit of a linear adventure. And I greatly appreciate that. So given those my initial thoughts, let's dive into some stuff here. First of all, this is, at least in my books, very much black metal. We have some pretty standard drumming ideas. We got the double bass kicks, blast beats. The guitars are primarily doing tremolo picking. They are not typically sitting on a single note. They are changing every 4 hits, which means that if we ignore the attacks themselves and we look at just when the notes change, we're looking at quarter note movement here. Well, I guess it really depends on how you view the song, actually. I'm trying to remember how long they would. Maybe it was 4? That would mean like the phrasing was weird because a lot of this was in 6/8. So 4 would be. We would change every 60% of a bar, which would mean some. Well, I mean, we get three notes per 2 bars. Maybe that's how it is. I don't know. I'd have to go back and really listen to when they're moving. But the idea is that we typically have 4 strokes on the same note before we move to the next one. And it creates this element that black metal does very well when putting more melodic components into this fast playing, which is both this element of urgency and sort of, I don't want to say lethargy, but it doesn't feel like we're rushing. There's urgency, but we're not rushing. The fast tremolo picking, the 16th notes, and the drumming and the guitar work, it provides this sense of urgency. Like we need to do something, we need to go somewhere. That's this driving force. But the speed that we actually change notes is a bit on the slower side. And it creates this nice little divide that I don't really think I've talked about too much when we speak about black metal, but it is a really big part of it. And at least in this song, it stood out to me a lot. And I don't know why, particularly this song, but this laid back urgency. I felt through a lot of this, which is interesting. We have the harsh vocals that sit above or kind of sit within everything. So, like, musically, compositionally, this is very much black metal. Interestingly, though, we move through a lot of different ideas. We move through a lot of time signatures. We bounce back and forth between 4/4 and 6/8 quite often. There's one moment we saw it in the first moment when we really hit the black metal section, right? We hit 6/8. And interestingly in there though, there's random pockets of 5/8. And I think it happened in the first 4-bar phrase. We have a 6/8, then a 6/8, then a 6/8, then a 5/8. And I felt like we lurched, but when I tried to listen to it again, it was 6. And then the next time was also 6, and we had this 6-bar or 6/8 for several bars, and then just out of nowhere, it feel like we skipped a beat somewhere again. And it felt like we did another 5/8. And eventually I finally landed on one of these 5s and counted out the 5. I know they exist. I heard it. Not only do I feel them, but I counted it. But I just couldn't find the pattern for when these 5s came in. They were always at the tail end of a 4-bar phrase. They were the 4th bar in the phrase. I just don't see a pattern of when we switched to the 6/6/6/5 instead of the 6/6/6/6. It's very interesting. It's got to be happening on a much larger level, very macro level, where instead of just looking at 4-bar phrases, we're looking at like 32-bar phrases. And maybe the 4th bar of every 32 bars is a 5. And I don't really know why. It's kind of an oddity. There's a moment where I actually thought maybe it was something to do with the timing and the drumming, because the drumming is very loose in here. And you know what? Let's just move into this. Like, I think we've covered that this is very clearly black metal with an orchestra. I mean, with a choir to it. So I want to touch on the drumming real quick. There is something very, very loose about the drumming here, and I don't want to say that as a negative, right? It could just be that the band plays around with tempo often, but there was one moment in the middle of the track where it felt like the tempo was shifting 5 to 10 BPMs every other bar. and it would just kind of speed up and then slow down and then speed up and then slow down and then speed up, and it was just like find a tempo and fixate on it. And I don't know if it is a performative thing or if it's like that in the studio, like maybe it's their intention to have this jagged tempo feeling. I noticed that it happened when the choir wasn't singing, which makes perfect sense because it'd be very difficult to get everybody uh, on with this. In that to say that the more people that you add for more complex situations, the easier it is for somebody to mess up and for things to get muddy. One person can play around with time very easily. Two people, it's a little more difficult, but it's possible. You try to get 50 people to all have drastic time or tempo changes, and it's going to be a bit more difficult to ensure that it's perfect and clean every time. But the guitarists felt like they went along with it as well. So it didn't feel so much as a temporal issue with the drummer. It felt like a portion of the composition. The song itself changes. So I'm not real sure how to approach that. I have to assume it's intentional, and I guess that's the best way to approach it. But it also feels very odd, especially when so much of the rest of the song, plus the genre as a whole, typically don't play around with tempo too often. You kind of pick the tempo for the section and you stick with it until you feel the need to change it, usually for a new section. So it was very weird there. I mean, it also happened to be during a blast beat section, and to me, it felt like a fatigue element, starting to slow down a little bit, overcompensate, and then bring it back to where it should be. That's what it feels like in practice. But being that everybody else went along with it, it feels intentional. It feels rehearsed. So I've definitely, if you know what's going on here, especially if it's like that in the studio, I think that would be the smoking gun, so to speak, piece of evidence to let me know if this is intentional or not, is if it happens in the studio. The studio version, I should say. But even aside from that, they play around with tempo in a seemingly more intentional style with a lot of fermatas. We'll be at the end of an idea and it'll feel like we tack on an extra half or full beats on the end of a phrase before moving into the next one, but nothing happens here. The guitars hold a note, the drums let the most recent snare hit kind of reverberate and kind of sit in the air for a little bit, and then kind of take their time getting to the next idea, getting to the downbeat of the next bar. It's an interesting concept, especially, I mean, just for black metal, right? I mean, fermatas are used in, well, let me define this real quick. I've used the word a couple of times. A fermata is just a pause in music, right? And it typically has no defined time. It's not like a rest. A rest tells you that you are not playing for this beat or these series of beats. And a fermata is a symbol that is put on top of a rest or on top of a note that tells you that this one beat takes up more than a beat, and it doesn't give you a defined length. A fermata could theoretically be 3 minutes long if you wanted it to, but it's usually dictated by the leader of the band. It's why sometimes you'll see a band holding out a note. Maybe the drummers are, oh, you know what? Like the big rock ending, really, really, big way to finish off a concert. Your guitar starts shredding, your drummer's all going crazy, your vocalist might be holding out a long note, and they'll be like, wow, and somebody will put their hand up and be like, and pull it off. Like they're showing that we are out of fermata, we're holding a note here, and we're done. The fermata is over. So a leader of the group is going to dictate the length of this fermata. In classical, it's typically going to be your conductor. So we have a lot of uses of fermata in here, though, and they seem to be directed by the drummer. The drummer has so much power over time in this song. It's kind of wild how many pockets of extra space are given where neither the tempo nor the meter dictate this extra space. And it makes the whole song feel warbly, if that makes any sense. There's some time warbleness going on where at any moment we could feel like we've lost a beat or gained a beat or that we've started to speed up or started to slow down, and it just feels very impermanent. And I'm kind of hoping to hear some of this concept in the lyrics, this idea of impermanence or not being able to root oneself in time or in an idea or something like that, just kind of feeling very loose. Um, because I'm really hoping to tie it back in here to sort of solidify it as an intentional element of the rhythmic concept of the song, because I don't have that idea of, or I don't have the knowledge of if this was intentional or not, and I haven't heard the studio version. So I'm kind of hoping I can link it to the lyrics and say, oh, it probably was intentional. The lyrics are exploring similar themes. But it's a very strange part of the track that is, I just don't know how I feel about it. I think even if it's done unintentionally, it implies a specific emotion that I very rarely hear in much music at all. Time is not something that gets played around with in this way. Like, we've heard prog bands mess around with time signature, and that has its own emotions that come with it, but nobody's really played around with tempo like this. And it's bizarre. Like, I'm fascinated by it, but I'm still curious as to the intentionality of it. Uh, the next big thing, what this band is doing that most are not, the choir. I really wanted more out of it. And longtime fans, this is not going to be a new topic at all. Uh, when metal bands, well, okay, let me start this over. When any group or person who works within a specific genre implements instrumentation from a different genre, I typically expect the compositional techniques from this other genre to be carried over as well. It is an expectation that is not always met. And I try not to be too biased against it. I understand that there's a huge difference between using a violin and writing traditionally classical music. But typically, when I hear a violin, I'm sort of expecting specific sounds and ideas to be paired with it. And it's one of my big hangups with a lot of symphonic metal is that they use the sound of an orchestra, but not the writing style of an orchestra. It's what led to Great Orchestration Use Week last year sometime when I wanted to hear metal bands using orchestras or at least string sections and actually incorporating classical elements into the music to support it rather than just to have the air of having strings with your music, having that elegance of the violin. Uh, no, I want to actually hear the violin being utilized in ways that it typically would be. Since you're evoking the ideas of classical, I want to hear some classical, that kind of vibe. So we have a choir here, and it's providing an elegance to the song. But that's it. It is, for the most part, consistently playing what the guitars are playing, albeit expanding the idea. The guitars, because they're playing so fast, the tremolo picking idea. In fact, I was going to say, because they're tremolo picking, they're playing single notes each. Can you tremolo pick chords? And I guess subsequently, does it even sound good? I mean, I suppose you can. You just got to widen your stroke. And I guess that wouldn't sound bad. We never see it. A lot of this really fast tremolo picking stuff, whether we're looking at speed metal or extreme metal or black metal, it's always single notes. Maybe there's an instrument providing a chordal idea, but it's not usually what the lead guitar is playing. But anyways, so from what I could see though, the two guitars were playing single notes each. There was a moment that we'll talk about in a bit where they were playing, harmonizing with each other. But for the most part, we don't really hear more than 2 or 3 notes if the bass was playing a third part of a chord to create a triad, um, together. So to really flesh out the chordal properties of the song, this is where the choir comes in. They sing the chords that line up with what the guitars are doing as lead instruments. And that's the choir's job from start to finish. I think there was one moment in the bridge where they got to sing by themselves, but the melody that they were singing was either identical to or a variation of something the guitars had already done. So this seems to me to be a song that was written first just for the band and then was adapted for the orchestra. Sorry, for the choir. But unlike something like Symphony Metallica, where they did the exact same thing, taking stuff that was originally written for a 4-piece rock band or metal band and then adapted for an orchestra, that selection of writing actually had new ideas written for the orchestra to embellish what Metallica had already written for their metal setup. This song just takes something that they've already done and fleshes it out a little bit, but doesn't actually do anything new to shed a new light on the song. And while it's not a bad idea, right? It works phenomenally well. It sounds epic, like it works 100%. But just somebody who comes from a classical background, I would really have loved for this to have new elements included to show a new side of this track. And honestly, without having heard the original, the only way I can know that they didn't add anything new is because the choir does exactly what the guitars do. if they had even included a single line that was different from the guitars, I wouldn't have known. I would have thought that it was complementary, new ideas being added. But the choir only does what the guitars are doing, and it's to me, it's just a missed opportunity. And that, again, that's not, I'm not trying to bash this, right? Lots of bands do this. It sounds fine. It sounds great. It definitely gives it this epic flair that I doubt the studio version has. You know, it sounds cool. I'm not denying that. I just think that when you bring in new instruments, they should add something other than texture. And there's definitely nothing against just using texture, but you have the opportunity to enhance an idea beyond texture, to enhance it texturally and compositionally, and you're only choosing half of it. So, although, tools in a toolbox, right? Sometimes it should only be done texturally. Maybe they did try to add new parts and nothing lined up. I don't know. Again, trying to be critical about it, not cynical. I don't want this to be just me bashing their decisions. It's very possible that they tried to do what I would have preferred and it didn't work out, but it is something that I kind of wish there was more of. Um I don't want to talk too much about the production here, even though, it's not, this isn't part of the production oriented theme that we're doing this week. But I do think it's interesting that I can hear all the instruments very clearly, even with it being a live recording that seems to have okay production on it. The audio quality is all right, right? And that's one of the reasons I don't want to talk too much about the production, because I don't know where this came from. It seems to be an official recording of the event, but it's not on an official page, so I don't know what kind of compression has diminished any of the audio between it being recorded and it arriving on this YouTube channel. But I do think it's really interesting that both guitars come through very clearly, the vocals come through clearly, the drums come through clearly, and it kind of lacks that black metal grit. And again, maybe it's just through a bunch of uh, the processes of converting the video from its original source to this one. But it feels like black metal. It sounds like black metal, but the drums are not super dry. There's a bit of reverb to them. There's a bit of the which is really nice. And the guitars, like I said, are very clean, very clear. They don't really have a lot of the grit over top of them, though I can hear some grit. So again, I don't want to put too much on this because I don't know the audio quality of the video, but it is some interesting things I picked up on while listening to it. Now, I guess we should get into the lyrics here, and I think that's going to wrap it up. Oh, no, 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 no. I want to talk about that guitar part real quick. So, really cool idea, and it probably happened elsewhere in the track too, but I didn't hear it anywhere else. It seems like a similar idea was appearing, but closer to the end of the track, we had both guitars playing similar ideas. I mean, basically, all the rhythmic components of black metal are similar. You just play 16th notes a lot. I mean, it's definitely a dumbing down of what black metal is, but it is what a lot of black metal ends up being in specific sections. It's just a lot of tremolo picking, 16th notes all the time. And so when you're creating counterpoint, you can't really create rhythmic counterpoint. You can, and we did see a little bit of that just earlier with Thantifaxath. That's such a hard name to say. That was the band we just checked out before Satyricon. There's definitely ways that you can play around subtly with rhythmic variation and still retain that black metal sound. But if you want both your guitarists to be playing 16th notes constantly, that's it. There's no other rhythmic component. That is black metal's staple, standard rhythmic idea. And it's more of a rule than an idea. Like with funk, you just want to go for syncopation. You can achieve syncopation in a lot of different ways. But with black metal, you want that constant, rigid attack. And there's only one way to do that. You got to constantly play notes at a specific speed. So if you're going to create counterpoint, it has to be melodic. And through a lot of this song, we saw melodic harmony, where both guitars would play the exact same thing, move or change notes at the exact same time, and even change the distance to between notes the same way. So if one goes up a whole step, the other one goes up a whole step. If one goes up a half step, the other one goes up a half step. And they're always in line with each other. They're just 4 or 5 steps apart, which creates the harmony. We have the distance between the two notes. So they're always moving at the same time, the same distance between them. And that creates dyads. And we have these really nice dyadic harmonies throughout this entire song. However, at this one point, right there at the end, I called it counterpoint, and then I kind of corrected myself, and I was like, we'll talk about it later. And this is why, because we do see some counterpoint in a sense. There's no rhythmic counterpoint. They are still playing the same rhythms, but they're changing notes at different times, and they don't seem to always be changing notes in the same distance. So assuming we have this harmony, we have the higher note and the lower note, maybe the lower note will come up a little bit, and then this one will come up, and then it'll drop, and then it'll go up, and then they're like going off at different times and moving around at different jump intervals. And it creates an idea of counterpoint. And I think by raw definition, it probably is. It sounds a bit strange to my ears because they're rhythmically doing the same thing. And so that's kind of where I was like, yeah, that's counterpoint. Oh, maybe it's not. But I think by definition, it is. They are two lead melody lines. By definition, they're both playing the same speed of note, and they're both creating a melodic line by changing pitch. Right? And I think they're both in the spotlight as well. They have the same volume, and there's no vocals over top them to be taking the spotlight. So they're both lead melody instruments, and they're both technically playing different things, even if rhythmically they're identical. So it is simultaneously a dyadic harmony, but it's also sort of counterpoint, and that's sort of where my brain was like, which one is it? What are they doing here? And at the end of the day, I don't think it matters. I'm going to go with calling it counterpoint. It is black metal's version of counterpoint. And I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a cool way to go about doing it, of adapting an idea to, um, an adapting idea to their genre, while not giving up anything that works well or kind of is required to be black metal. It's a very cool way to go about that. So yeah, let's dive into the lyrics now. The song's called Mother North, and we start off by saying, "Hey, Mother North, how can they sleep while their beds are burning? How can they sleep while your fields are bleeding?" Okay. Oh yeah, this is another thing. I talked about that. I noticed that he would say like two sentences and then just stop singing for a while, and then come in like 2 minutes later and say like two more sentences and then just back off. It's very interesting how sparse and short the vocal aspect or the lyrical aspect is in this song. So, anyways, then we have memories, the invisible wounds, pictures that enshrine your throne, gone. So this Mother North character is being forgotten, it seems. That the pictures of Mother North are not here anymore, and that the memories of Mother North are like open wounds. People wish that this person or this deity or this whatever would come back, and the memories of them, it opens pain, right? There's sorrow or regret or anger. It's an open wound to remember that this Mother North entity is forgotten. Says, "A future benighted, still they are blind, pigeon-hearted beings of flesh and blood, keeps closing their eyes for the dangers that threaten ourselves and our nature, and that is why they all enrage me." So he's basically saying, um, that people have forgotten Mother North, and they don't even know the dangers of forgetting this entity. That completely forgetting or removing Mother North from whatever this is, possibly culture, if we're going to go with the idea of deity and mythology, that we're removing this part of our culture, and that it's endangering our nature and ourselves. He says it threatens ourselves and our nature, and that's why he's mad. Goes on to say, "Sometimes in the dead of night I mesmerize my soul with sights and visions, prophecies and horror, they all come in one." So it almost seems like he thinks himself some sort of seer. He can see the future, both prophecies, which makes it sound kind of positive, maybe a return of Mother North, and horror, a possible future where Mother North never comes back. Says they all come in one: the sights, the visions, the prophecies, the horrors. He ends the song with, "Mother North, united we stand. Phantom North, I'll be there when you hunt them down." I don't know who Phantom North is. The wrong time to introduce a new character to your story is in the second to last sentence. Uh, I'm going to assume it's some sort of possibly another name for Mother North, or maybe in the mythology, a partner to Mother North. But that seems what this. I mean, this song's pretty clear on the surface. Then there is a part of culture that is being forgotten, and he's upset by that. And he thinks that bad things are going to come if this part of the culture is not returned. I guess it's kind of all there is to say about it. I'm curious what culture this is. I mean, maybe it could also be made up. I don't know. Um, Yeah, like I'm just curious, right? I think I have a pretty good reading on this. There is some sort of entity or deity that is a central aspect of a culture, and that part of the culture is leaving, probably for something, a progression of culture, so to speak. And this person is not happy with it. And the progression could be both positive or negative, depending on how you see what's going on or what it's being replaced with, what your perspective is on this specific entity or deity. Um, so, I mean, anybody who is part of a religion of any type, and whether that is a Christian and you're looking at the Christian God, or Islam, or in this case whatever this religion would be with this Mother North deity. If you fully believe in your religion and you see that it's fading away and you're finding it difficult to practice it, I can see how you could be enraged by that. Especially if you don't agree with what it's being replaced by. I mean, it could be replaced by nothing. It could be a de-religioning. What would you call that? A progress towards atheism, I suppose. And that could be, that could upset them, but that's also very different from your culture being replaced by a different religion or a different culture. And that might feel like an attack. So, yeah, like I don't know how I particularly stand on this. I think it's an interesting song, but without having the context around it, I mean, it just seems to be like some dude upset that his history isn't being uh, thought of as highly as he thinks it should be. History and culture, kind of all in one. So yeah, I'm kind of curious what the context to this is. Is this just a made up story with a made up culture? Just the band's just telling a story, or does this have historical context? Let me know in the comments. And I asked a couple of questions in here as well. Hit me up with the answers to those if you got them. I'm curious. As for how all this ties back into the music, I don't know. It just sounds like some good old black metal with this story attached to it. I can't really say that there's too many elements of thematic cohesion between the two. And I was looking for elements of not being able to root yourself, and maybe that kind of fits in here, but I don't think it's as strong as a tying that would, at least in this case, solidify the temporal shifts that were going on in the music. So I'm still curious if that's intentional or not. Hit me up with those. Yeah, that wraps it up for today. When you're done commenting, head up to the description box and there's a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. It's got everything related to the channel in it. You can submit your own special selection, pick up some merch, join the Patreon, follow me on Twitter, all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all three of those. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. Nope. 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. It has been 9 p.m. for a while. We went into daylight saving time 3 weeks ago, and I think I've been pretty good about keeping up with the 9 lately. I don't know what changed today. Yes, 5 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. UTC. We're going to finish up this week's theme of hi-fi black metal and check out a creator request, which is where a band gets in contact with me and asks me to check out their music. Until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.